orderly society, you have to have regulation. I have never had any authority to make regulations in my house. My wife made all those regulations. And you damn better live by them, you know, or the same thing in your house. And our sons and I had to, actually our sons and I are all in business, and we always were doing a lot of things when they were young. And my wife, who's got a lot of education, went back and got an accounting degree. And I said, why are you doing that? And she said, I don't trust you guys. We're going to spend our money. I'm going to know what the hell we're doing with it. And that's a great attitude. But over-regulation is a real problem. So we spend $1.75 trillion a year on regulation in this country. And by the way, we need most of it. We need a huge amount of it. We need air traffic control regulations, but we should get busy and do the high technology, which is very cheap, and get around all those arguments and do that. We need regulation on the road. We need regulation in healthcare. We need regulation in food. We need regulation. It's an orderly society. And for a long, long time, we bitched and moaned about the regulation, but it was pretty, you could deal with it and you could go fight with it. And then we had a big bleep up when George Bush was in office because of Homeland Security. We had a reaction to 9/11 that was somewhat like what happened after Pearl Harbor. And we put in more rules and regulations and protections, and who would stand up and say no? Well, we're looking now how to put them together more effectively and do that sort of thing. But, okay, we had the bleep. The society said, great, we're going to pay for it, we're going to do that. And I can tell you, I can't tell you specifically because then I'd have to kill you all, and I can't do that. But a lot of the things that they put in place made it possible not to have some other very, very ugly happening. And only in America could you have stopped that. So now then, where are we? We are building a regulatory, and what we call it, and one of my staff said to me this morning, don't say this because of what happened in Japan. Because we call it a regulatory tsunami. And what the tsunami did this morning in Japan was huge waves going over, highways and homes and communities. But you can envision that in what I'm talking about regulation. Let me give you just 3 examples. And it doesn't matter whether you like the health care bill or not. We wanted a health care bill. We think we have gotten something that fundamentally is going to cost a lot more than we thought, or that was alleged. We can prove that. It's going to restrict health care the way we don't want it to happen. But it's got some good things in it. But, now let's see, how many people we got here? 100? Well, let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say there's 140 or 50. That's how many new agencies, committees, commissions, bureaucratic offices that are going to regulate the healthcare system eventually under this new bill. That's worse than having the Motor Vehicle Administration control the healthcare people. So I'm not arguing, some of those things are worthwhile, but any rational person would say, I don't think we're going to get to where we want to go with that kind of regulation. And every one of those has multiples of regulation. So you wouldn't be surprised that already the Department of Health and Human Services has given more than 1,000 exemptions to the health care bill that hadn't been in place for over a year. And that's because they're finding out that this thing that was done in a great frenzy is not exactly what we thought, and we have to go back and do something about it. So a lot of regulation. Then there is the issue of the regulation of the capital markets. Some would argue, and I would too, that there was some regulation that we needed. Only problem with this massive regulation of the capital markets, it never regulated or dealt with what caused the problem. I mean, what caused the first part of the problem was a very legitimate, caring concern by people that folks should be able to own a house, whether you could afford it or not. And so we put a thing in place that really, and it was the Congress, they were pushing the organizations of government, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the banks and everybody to make these loans available. And after the savings and loan crisis of many years ago, we told all those institutions, now you securitize all those loans. Securitize meaning you sell them to somebody else right away. Well, that was before we started selling things all over the world. And the securitization of those loans look like spaghetti now. So we didn't fix that. And by the way, they're still at it on the foreclosure parts of this stuff. But we did fix a whole lot of things. But think about this mathematically. Do you remember Sarbanes-Oxley? And Sarbanes-Oxley was a good, I think I'm talking too long, get this done quick. Sarbanes-Oxley was a deal that was well-intended. And so they passed the law, and then they had to pass 16 regulations to make it work, and it took 2.5 years. And we got through it, and we're working on it, and we're fixing some of the stuff that didn't work. But most of all, I thought it did some good stuff. So now, what was the financial regulatory bill? There were, everybody's arguing what the number was, but let's just say 250 to 275 mandated regulations, depending whether you take them apart or put them together. And another 200 recommended regulations. Now, whatever you're talking about 400 or 500 regulations. So I figure this granddaughter I'm going to see later today, 5 years old, is going to be retired from federal service before we ever get all that stuff implemented. So everybody knows you can't make that work. And I did a press interview before, and the questions that were asked, pretty smart guy, I said, look, the point is, what do we do to make sure the system works, and what do we do to make sure there's capital for people that want to start a business, run a business, continue a business, or employ somebody? So what we're doing is very simple. We're going into the Congress, and we're saying, look, got to do two things. We want the Congress and the Senate to take an up and down vote on any regulation that costs more than $100 billion. Pretty fair, good deal? And we want to change the rules, now it might get some people upset here, on how we could file a suit against the regulation. And with all the independent agencies and everybody got one set of rules. And that is it economically sound? Does it do its deal? But with the EPA, who, by the way, couldn't, the administration couldn't get anything out of the Congress on some of the things they're going to do, so they told the EPA to do it. But they have a set of rules under which they can be sued that is equivalent to saying if they're not a terrorist, you can't sue them. And so what we're saying, two things. Let's put the bill in so the guys we sent to Congress and the Senate can vote it up or down. Because then we're not going to get with 500. We'll come back with 50. And let's get a deal so we have a clear understanding what it takes to raise the issue in court. And I think if we can get that done, we're going to be doing well. And then we're going to do one other thing, and this is not fair really, but we're going to do it. And that is we want to get some focus on these regulatory excesses. So we've gotten some real smart people who really understand these issues, and some people that run small companies, and we're going to have them all over the country this day, that week, next week, talking about these issues, talking about independent, regulations that don't make sense to their business or to their community. Why? We want the Congress to focus on this. When the government was set up in this country, it was a three-part government: the elective, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Who the hell ever heard of the regulatory branch that's 500 times the rest of them? So maybe we ought to have a little oversight.